Welcome to the Struggle for Black Equality, a series of conversations that attempt to answer the question, why has it been such a struggle for Black Americans to gain basic civil rights, the right to eat in a restaurant, live in a neighborhood, go to a school, work a job, and be treated equally under the law? This conversation, the Black response to Jim Crow, 1900 to 1930, looks at how Black Americans responded to the Jim Crow system in the early 20th century, an era of intense racial prejudice in which racism and injustice were widespread and accepted. Our conversation will discuss blackface, the Niagara Movement, the Springfield riots, the NAACP, the anti-lynching campaign, the Great Migration, the race riots of 1919, the Harlem Renaissance, and the rise of Black nationalism. The depth of the racism of the early 1900s is most obvious in the popularity of blackface, white performers in black makeup portraying blacks as dim-witted, lazy, superstitious, buffoonish, happy-go-lucky, and predatorial. Blackface, which began in the 1800s, was immensely popular during this era. The popularity of blackface did not begin to wane until the 1950s. Some Black performers also appeared in blackface and reversed the roles between the white and Black characters to poke fun at white people. Burt Williams and George Walker were masters of this use of blackface. Blacks also protested stereotypical portrayal of themselves with photographic portraits, or daguerreotypes, which were popular at the time. Frederick Douglass believed that portraying blacks in a dignified manner would neutralize the effect of demeaning stereotypes. The most influential Black leader of the era was W.E.B. Du Bois, who opposed the accommodation of Jim Crow by Booker T. Washington and advocated resistance through political agitation. Du Bois saw in Black people a double consciousness that he described as, quote, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body. Du Bois argued that the talented tenth of Black society must advance through education, become Black leaders, write books, and work for social change. Du Bois, along with William Trotter, was instrumental in creating the Niagara Movement in 1905. In its Declaration of Principles, the movement's leaders stated that, quote, we refuse to allow the impression to remain that the Negro American assents to inferiority, is submissive under oppression, and apologetic before insults. One of the catalysts for future Black organization was the Springfield riot of 1908. When a Black man was accused of raping a prominent white woman, a white mob gathered with the intent to lynch the man arrested for the crime. When the mob found out the sheriff had moved the man to another jail for his protection, the mob turned on Black neighborhoods, burning and looting homes and businesses in Springfield and surrounding towns. The Springfield riots led to the organization of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1909, an organization that included white and Black members. The NAACP's stated purpose was, quote, to promote equality of rights and eradicate caste or race prejudice, to advance the interest of colored citizens, to secure for them impartial suffrage, and to increase their opportunities for securing justice in the courts, education for their children, employment according to their ability, and complete equality before the law. The organization in the beginning focused mainly on litigation. The NAACP journal The Crisis was edited by Du Bois and focused on black access to labor unions, the right to vote, and the anti-lynching campaign, and eroding the myth that blacks were content with the status quo, not concerned with the rights of citizenship, and preferred separation. Ida B. Wells headed up the anti-lynching campaign. Wells first became known when she was removed from a Memphis train for being black, and she filed a lawsuit in 1884. In 1892, Wells published a news story on a Memphis lynching. A white mob responded to her article by burning her offices and forcing her out of town. Wells also led a boycott of the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. But Wells' major work was to bring attention to the hundreds of lynchings of mostly black men throughout the South. Wells proclaimed that lynching is Keller line murder. Crimes against women is the excuse for lynching, but not the cause, and lynching was a national crime that required a national remedy. The Great Migration of Black Americans from the South to northern cities was an important element in the struggle for black equality. World War I, which caused the need for labor in northern factories, provided the opportunity, and between 1916 and 1970, 6 million blacks responded. The most popular destination for black families were Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Detroit. As blacks moved into northern cities in large numbers, racial tensions heightened and then exploded in 1919. In Chicago, Eugene Williams, a black man, wandered into a segregated beach and was stoned and then killed by whites. When the police refused to make arrests, a week of rioting ensued in the South Side, in which 15 whites and 23 blacks were killed. More than 1,000 black homes were destroyed. The rioting then spread to other cities. President Wilson blamed whites for instigating the violence. The movement of blacks into northern cities had the result of congregating them into small areas in large numbers, very unlike their experience in the sparsely populated rural South. As a result, a new racial consciousness began to emerge. The Harlem Renaissance was the result. In this movement, musicians, writers, poets, and artists like Alan Locke, Anne Spencer, Louis Armstrong, and Langston Hughes epitomized a new attitude emphasizing basic self-respect, self-reliance, and racial pride for black Americans. The Harlem Renaissance was not a separatist movement, but rather a movement that attempted to place black Americans within the context of American institutions and democracy. Harvard Sitkoff summarized the movement's importance. Whether celebrating the racial chauvinism of African Americans, affirming their identification with Africa, or decrying lynchings and racial oppression, poets and novelists of Keller sought to free themselves from white symbols and images and to write in their own idiom. By focusing white America's attention on blacks, by awakening the pride of African Americans in their race and folk traditions, and by militant protests and demands for civil rights, the new Negro articulated the possibility of change brought about by migration. A black separatist movement also emerged in the 20s. Jamaican Marcus Garvey organized the United Negro Improvement Association in 1912 to promote black nationalism. Garvey's goal was for blacks to achieve financial independence from white-dominated society and to unite African people into a country of their own. His separatist political philosophy advocated complete social, political, and economic freedom. The FBI investigated Garvey and deported him in 1927, but he continued his movement from abroad. Some takeaways from our conversation. In the early 1900s, black leaders such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells organized a movement that directly opposed the system of Jim Crow and its accommodation by black leaders. The Great Migration of black Southerners to northern cities that began in 1916 had enormous consequences for race relations, as well as black solidarity, racial consciousness, and protest. Two important black movements developed in the 1920s: the Harlem Renaissance, a non-separatist literary movement that emphasized self-respect, self-reliance, and racial pride within the context of American institutions and democracy, and the separatist movement of Marcus Garvey that advocated black nationalism. Some things to think about. What does the use of blackface by Black Americans tell us about the Black response to Jim Crow, as well as the racial dynamic of the Jim Crow era? What does Du Bois' theory of double consciousness tell us about the psychology of being Black in America during the era of Jim Crow? Is the emergence of the non-separatist Harlem Renaissance and Garvey's separatist Black nationalism surprising? Why or why not? And what did the race riots of 1908 and 1919 tell us about the struggle for Black equality? Some excellent resources. Du Bois of Booker T. Washington and Others is essential, comes from his book The Souls of Black Folk. Ida B. Wells' Lynching or National Crime is also essential. You can also take a look at Alan Locke's book The New Negro, the film Birth of a Nation, and the Langston Hughes poem Mother to Son. Thanks for joining our conversation today. God bless you, and remember, keep thinking about things that matter.